Hey everyone, welcome back to our FPS series. In this episode, we're going to create a global trigger system. This is going to allow you to activate enemies or any other entities like doors or traps with one single triggerable component. The first thing that we need to do is create our triggerable component. I'm going to add that into our components script area over here. So it'll be a brand new script. We're going to call this component, create that, and it's just a regular node, nothing weird, just going to contain that script. We're going to open that up and we're going to work through this piece by piece. So the first thing that we need to do is we're going to make this a tool script because we're going to integrate this into our Trench Broom setup. If you haven't watched the Trench Broom videos, you can go back and look at those within the playlist. This is going to make it really easy and fast to create these enemy encounter scenarios. We're going to paste in the top here. We have a tool script. We're going to call this a triggerable component for our class name, extending node, and then we're going to include one export variable that is our target name. So if you're familiar with Trench Broom, when you have a trigger and then something you're going to trigger, like an entity, you typically have a target and then a target name. The trigger volume in this case is going to have a target, that is what it's going to trigger, and then the entity that has the triggerable component is going to have the target name. Now, if you're not familiar with Trench Broom, you can go back to those videos so you can understand what this is. As a quick review, func Godot apply properties is what runs whenever we run our build map function within our Godot map node. That's going to take whatever we put in our target name within Trench Broom and apply it to our export here. You don't have to use Trench Broom. You can totally use this just in the engine, but if you're using Trench Broom, you're going to need that function apply properties. Next, within the ready function, we're going to do a call deferred and then add to group. Now, the add to group function is what we're going to use to bundle what I would call map entities. Now, in my mind, this is anything that is interactable, that's dynamic. So your enemies are dynamic. A switchable light bulb might be dynamic. This bundles everything that is dynamic into this group. And when we have a trigger object, we're going to search for the target name within this group and then trigger those entities. This also means that you can trigger multiple enemies at the same time if you use the same target name. So let's go to our simple enemy that we've been working on, and we're going to add that triggerable component to the first level. So having the root as the parent there, and we can set our target name. We can call this enemy1. And then let's take a look at what our entity script needs to do. So instead of having to add all of this trigger logic to every single entity that you want to have triggered, we just add this component and we can add a few helper functions instead. First, we make sure that we have a onReady reference to that triggerable component. Double check your name there. Now, previously we added an onTriggered event and we're just using our detection area. And that is just a sphere that when the player enters it, that triggers the enemy. Pretty basic, it works well. But let's say you wanted to trigger an enemy by opening a door or walking down a hallway or going into a specific part of the room that's not near the enemy. That's when you need this trigger setup. So this is fine for getting too close, but we're going to add some more functions underneath this. The first being get target name. Now, the actual trigger volume, that is the area 3D, is going to interact with this root node, this enemy, because this is the node that gets added to the group. It's going to look through the group. It's going to search for a specific target name, and it's going to use this function to do that. Now, the target name actually lives in that triggerable component. So we're going to return triggerable target name if we have that component. Otherwise, we don't have a target name and we'll just skip through it. Now, if we do have a target name, then we want to trigger this entity. And so we're going to add a onTrigger function, and we're going to pass along our player because that's going to get passed along from the volume. And in this case, we're going to activate the enemy by sending it to our toFollow state within our state chart. That is what we've been doing with our detection area, but now I'll just do that when we trigger it. And that's it. So for any entity that you wanted to trigger, you just need to get a target name and have some logic within the onTrigger function. You can also have a deactivate. We're going to talk about that in a second if you wanted to turn something off, but it's pretty simple logic. Finally, let's create the third piece of this puzzle by creating our trigger volume. Let's add it to the environment where you can make another folder for triggers. We'll call this trigger volume. It's going to be a area 3D in this case. So we'll inherit that from an area 3D. We'll create that, open that up, and we'll clear that out. So because this is going to be working within Broom, we need a tool script, and we're going to set a class name for trigger volume, extending area 3D, and we'll add in our exports and our variable here. So for our exports, we have targets. We have a Boolean for whether we want to trigger it just one time. And we also have a Boolean for whether we want to trigger when the player exits the area. And then finally, just a delay if you wanted to add a delay to the actual triggering. And then finally, just a variable for whether or not we have triggered it. And then we'll default that to false. And then just to wrap up the Broom portion of this, and we've gone through this in a different video, but just to look at it real quick again, we have our func Godot apply properties. Again, this runs whenever we build our map. And we just need to take what is in our Broom data and apply it to the actual node within the engine. That's why we have the tool scripts, so we can run in the editor, and we need to just parse through some of this stuff. First is our target string. So the way that Broom deals with this is you can't actually do an array as you would do in the engine. You have a string, and then you create a comma delimited version of that. So we have our target, and then you could add another target by doing a comma, and then say enemy 1, right? That information has to be parsed out so the editor knows what to do with it. We do that by getting the target as we do. And if we don't have an empty target string, we're going to split those targets. And we use that with the split function here. That allows us to set a delimiter. In this case, we're using a comma, and splits those up into an array. Then we just clear our targets in case we've run this before and we already have something in here. And then for target within our split targets array, we're going to add that string into our targets array. All this does is taking that string, that's a comma delimited string, and splits it up into an array of different targets. Then we have a trigger once, and we just set our trigger once, trigger on exits. Those are just Booleans. And then our delay is a float. Let's actually get into the meat of what this trigger volume is going to do. First, we just have our boilerplate ready, body entered, and then body exited. So just the standard connection of our body entered and exited signals to our on-body entered and on-body exited functions. So when the player enters, we're going to check if we're triggering once and has triggered. So if we're triggering once is true and we've already triggered, then we don't want to do anything. We've done our job, don't worry about it. So we return. If that's not the case, we're going to check if the body is the player controller and then set has triggered to true. If there's a delay over 0, await using a timer for that delay. Then we're going to run our activate targets function. We haven't added that yet, but just know that that runs. And then on exit, if we want to actually do a trigger on exits, then check if the body is a player again, and then run the deactivate targets function, which means we have two functions that we need to add here. The first being the activate targets function. So because we have the player information, we're going to pass that along. And if the targets is empty, we're done, return. And then we need to get our entities. And that's going to be done by using the map entities group that the trigger component is putting everything into. So we get all of the nodes within that group. And again, if you wanted to, make this more definitive, you can make a group for just enemies or make a group for doors or anything like that. I have everything within one group because maybe I want to trigger a door and a sound or an enemy all at once. Everything fits within that map entities, and you're not going to be searching through a giant list of nodes anyway. Very low overhead. So we search within that group. Then for every target name that we have within our targets array, that is the array of targets that we created, remember? For every entity in that entity group, we're going to check if that entity has the get target name and if the get target name value equals the target name that we're searching for. If it does, we'll also check if that entity has the onTrigger method, and if it does, we're going to trigger. So that handles the activation of the targets, and then the logic for the deactivation is pretty much the same. So we'll paste that in. Again, if target is empty, return, get our entities from our map entities group, check for that target name within those entities, check that we have the get target name method, and if it matches the target name, and if it has the deactivate method, run it. Now within our current level, I've created the trigger volume and then added a collision shape. It's just a basic cube there. And you need to make sure that you set the trigger volume mask to whatever layer that your player is on. In this case, the player is on layer 2. So we make sure that we're checking for the player, otherwise it's not going to work. And then go into your targets and add whatever your target name is. In this case, it's enemy 1 because in our enemy, we've set our component target name to enemy 1. So make sure you have a target name in there. You want to trigger it 1 time and no delay for now. And we should be able to run this. And when I enter in that space right there, our enemies should trigger, and they do. Now I can move this just to show you and say we wanted to move this trigger over to the far side of the wall, and we'll add a 1 second delay and we'll press play. We'll head over here. And there's our delay. So now you can trigger anything. You just add that component. You get your reference to your component in your script, check for the target name, and run your logic. That's all you need to do. As always, you can get the project files exactly as we have it right now on my Patreon. Again, we're going to be moving into weapons because I'm really sick of looking at this little cube thing for a gun. And we can do a lot better, and we're going to do a lot better. So stay tuned for that. More is coming. And as always, keep creating.